You get taken as a value pick in the 5th round. If I'm here, I'm here. If I'm not, I'm not. There's no other rookie quarterback saying that in any one of their other teams. I'm glad Shedeur said it. I'm glad that he let the Browns know. Not an ideal situation, but I want to make it very clear to everyone. Under no circumstances has that kid been a problem, or has he been a bad teammate, or has he had a bad attitude. In fact, I thought he said everything yesterday that I wanted to hear.
On Sunday, the coaching staff of the Cleveland Browns entered Soldier Field with what can only be called a game plan disguised as a suicide mission. And Shedeur Sanders paid the price with 3 interceptions, 5 brutal sacks, and a performance that made casual fans doubt his skills, while those who watched the game knew he was destined to fail from the first kickoff. The purported offensive mastermind, Kevin Stefanski, who has received recognition for his inventiveness and meticulousness throughout his coaching career, presented a game plan that was so out of touch with reality and so inappropriate for his players that it verged on coaching malpractice. This was more than just a young quarterback having a rough day or one team outperforming another. This was a total failure to position your franchise quarterback for success, a form of organizational sabotage. And given what they saw in Chicago, Browns supporters have every right to be incensed. Although the final score of 31-3 only tells a portion of the story, it is a significant one, since it depicts total dominance from beginning to end. Late in the game, the Browns lost a game that wasn't particularly competitive. A few plays here and there didn't make the difference in this close game. This was a methodical dismantling of a Cleveland team that arrived in Chicago unprepared, understaffed, and seemingly led by a staff that had not learned from the previous week's triumph. Even his most ardent supporters would recoil at Shedeur Sanders' final statistics: 177 yards, 18 completions on 35 attempts, 3 devastating interceptions, and no touchdowns. The Browns lost 35 yards as a result of his 5 sacks, leaving their rookie quarterback bruised and wondering if his own team would support him. For Browns supporters who actually attend the game instead of merely glancing at box scores and basing their opinions solely on statistics, this is what makes the situation so frustrating. The Browns' offensive strategy against Cam Ward and company was shrewd, effective, and precisely suited to Sanders' strengths just a week prior. Fast outs that quickly removed the ball from his grasp. He was able to distribute screen passes to playmakers in space. Created rollouts that allowed Sanders to use his athleticism and create with his legs outside the pocket. He was placed in successful situations by the coaching staff. Early on, I gave him simple completions to boost his confidence and let the game come to him organically. As a result, Browns supporters were genuinely thrilled about their quarterback's future after his performance, despite the fact that the team still lost. What, then, was different between that successful strategy and the Chicago catastrophe? In just 7 days, did Sanders suddenly lose his ability to play quarterback? Between games, did he lose all of his talent? Obviously not. The entire offensive strategy, the philosophy, and the game plan were altered. Stefanski and his offensive staff apparently decided to throw all that progress in the trash and asked Sanders to operate in a traditional drop-back passing attack behind backup offensive linemen against a playoff-bound defense that was going to bring maximum pressure and aggression. This was in contrast to learning from what worked and building on that foundation, as well as realizing that Sanders performs best when given quick reads and opportunities to get outside the pocket. It is impossible to overestimate the influence of the offensive line situation on everything that went wrong on Sunday afternoon. Sanders had been building relationships with these starting 5 players throughout the season. These weren't even the main backup choices who were aware of their responsibilities and had some NFL experience. In several positions, the Browns were using what amounted to third-string offensive linemen against a Chicago defense that was licking their chops at the matchup advantages they were about to exploit. Practice squad players were thrown into starting roles. It was clear from the first snap that Cleveland's offensive line was totally outmatched, unable to offer even the most basic defense, and that Sanders would have to fend for himself against Bears defenders one after another. This is the point at which coaching malpractice is blatantly obvious and unacceptable. Football players sustain injuries. That is a fact of life in this cruel sport. Coaches must modify their strategy based on the personnel available when players sustain injuries and rosters are exhausted. Stefanski, however, did not adapt. He didn't adjust his strategy to take into consideration the obvious fact that his offensive line couldn't keep Sanders safe for longer than 2 seconds. The quick game ideas that had proven effective were not applied by him. Sanders needed to get the ball out quickly last week, and he did it so beautifully. He did not create throwing lanes outside the pocket where the protection concerns would be less obvious, nor did he design rollouts or bootlegs to help Sanders escape pressure. Rather, the Browns employed the same deep drops in the pocket, the same slow-developing passing plays, and the same time and protection-demanding concepts that just weren't there. Sanders ran non-stop throughout the afternoon, trying to make plays with defenders in his face and dodging pressure from all directions before routes had a chance to develop downfield. That isn't coaching. That would be letting your quarterback get away with it and then feigning surprise when the outcome is disastrous. It's similar to sending someone into combat without any armor, weapons, or assistance and then wondering why they were destroyed. The story of the protection breakdown is not fully revealed by the 5 sacks that Sanders absorbed. There were probably 2 or 3 other plays in which he narrowly avoided being taken down, in which he had to completely abandon the play design and attempt to use his legs and improvisational skills to create something from nothing. That is mentally and physically taxing. Having a 280-pound defensive end in your face before your back foot even touches the ground makes it discouraging to know that even if you make all the correct reads, see the field perfectly, and spot open receivers downfield, you have no chance of completing the pass. The lack of tools and assistance that Sanders is dealing with in Cleveland's offensive system is aptly illustrated by the Jerry Jeudy scenario. Jeudy had a terrible game, and the touchdown that Sanders dropped and landed in his chest symbolizes every issue with the Browns' receiving core. Sanders made a flawless throw, the kind of pass that needs to be delivered into tight coverage with touch and anticipation. The simplest catch a professional receiver can be asked to make, the ball struck Jeudy squarely in the chest, and he simply dropped it. The ball bounced up and became an interception that went on Sanders' permanent record, even though it was all Jeudy's fault. In addition, he missed a touchdown that would have given the Browns some momentum and added interest to the game. This type of circumstance renders using statistics alone to assess quarterback performance wholly insufficient and deceptive. Sanders is accused of interception. When casual fans who didn't watch the game see his passer rating plummets, they assume he made a bad throw or a bad choice. However, anyone who was paying attention realized that Sanders performed flawlessly in that play. He recognized the matchup, hit the ball with precision, and had faith in his receiver to make a simple, expert catch. Jeudy was solely responsible for the failure. However, Sanders takes the criticism and pays the statistical price. Here's the bigger picture, though, which is even more damning of the Browns' organizational choices. For what reason is Jerry Jeudy your top receiver? Why is a franchise quarterback expected to lead an offense in the absence of a genuine, top-tier receiving threat who can consistently win one-on-one games and make contested catches when the play fails? There are a lot of complementary pieces for the Browns who receive CP. When they are your 3rd or 4th option, these guys can make plays, but when you ask them to be your main targets, they become totally exposed. The Browns just haven't given Sanders a true alpha receiver, someone who demands double teams and opens doors for everyone else. The disparities in coaching and support staff are painfully evident when comparing Sanders' performance to Caleb Williams' success on the opposing sideline. Williams was sacked just 3 times while completing 17 of 28 passes for 242 yards and 2 touchdowns. He appeared at ease. Get everyone back up. I'm grateful. Let's be honest about the conditions each quarterback was working in, but Williams is a gifted quarterback who deserves praise for his performance. Williams had more dependable weapons, much better protection, and a coaching staff that developed a strategy that played to his advantages and the matchup's circumstances. Meanwhile, every facet of Sanders' offensive infrastructure was exposed. His personnel limitations were not factored into the game plan. He was not protected by the offensive line. The receivers were unable to catch or separate. There was no threat or balance in the running game. Furthermore, as the catastrophe played out in front of them, the coaching staff made no significant changes. Sanders is not responsible for that. That is a complete failure of the organization. And Stefanski is ultimately accountable for everything as the head coach and play caller. The Browns' difficulties on special teams throughout the game contributed to the organizational dysfunction that was evident. In the NFL, where games are frequently decided by 1 or 2 possessions, special teams' excellence or incompetence can have a significant impact on the outcome. This may seem like a minor detail when compared to offensive and defensive breakdowns. You're fighting with one hand tied behind your back before the offense or defense even takes the field when your special teams are missing field goals, giving up big returns, or failing to complete basic coverage assignments. Another aspect of organizational failure that led to the decisive defeat was the Browns' special teams. The total elimination of the running game made Sanders' job much more challenging and directly impacted Chicago's defensive strategy. Defenses can pin their ears back and rush the passer with reckless abandon if you are unable to establish any threat on the ground, and they know you are one-dimensional and must throw everything down. Because they know you can't hurt them with runs, they can play aggressive coverage. They can use pressure packages and exotic blitzes that are intended to induce turnovers and sacks. Sanders was working in the worst possible environment for a young quarterback behind a compromised offensive line because the Browns were unable to run the ball effectively and only managed to gain a small amount of yardage on their attempts. Everything you need to know about the expectations for this game can be found in the fact that the Chicago Bears were 7 and 12-point favorites. Vegas was aware that Chicago was superior. Although 7.5 points suggests a competitive game where the underdog has a fighting chance if things go right, the betting public was aware that the Browns were undermanned and up against the odds. Instead, we saw a landslide victory in which the Browns never even attempted to add interest. Not only did they fail to cover the spread, but they also failed to perform in a competitive manner, and preparation and coaching are directly responsible for that. The assertion that Stefanski will talk after the game, but that his remarks are meaningless, strikes at the heart of the dissatisfaction that Browns supporters have with their head coach. Stefanski excels at making the correct statements during press conferences and crafting well-crafted statements that, while technically correct, ignore the core issues that are ruining this team. While utterly evading responsibility for the coaching choices that set Sanders up for failure, he will discuss advancement, growth, and educational opportunities. Browns supporters are sick of business jargon. Instead of more meaningless platitudes about procedure and patience, they want an honest assessment of what's wrong and specific plans for how to fix it. The realistic course of action for a Browns team in dire need of long-term quarterback success is to build around Sanders through the draft. For this franchise, Sanders is the solution. There is no denying the talent. The mental composition appears to be appropriate. Talent alone is insufficient when you're playing behind third-string offensive linemen with practice squad receivers and a coaching staff that can't or won't modify their strategy to maximize your strengths, even though the work ethic and leadership are clear. The Browns must spend high draft picks on offensive line support, get a real number 1 receiver who can win on a regular basis, and surround Sanders with the resources he needs to succeed. The fact that Tennessee is not a playoff team, and Chicago is, offers important background information for analyzing Sunday's events. Nobody anticipated that the Browns would stomp into Soldier Field and thrash a top-tier opponent vying for a postseason spot. However, there is a significant difference between losing a hard-fought game to a superior team and being completely humiliated due to the inability of your coaching staff to create a viable strategy. The Browns' defeat wasn't a simple one. They were outclassed, humiliated, and completely dominated throughout the entire game. Regardless of the caliber of the opponent, that is unacceptable. Anyone with a basic understanding of football should be able to see that Sanders cannot defeat playoff teams without the right equipment and support. Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes do not win Super Bowls by themselves. They have strong running games, multiple weapons, top-tier offensive lines, and coaching staffs that make the most of their abilities. Sanders is being asked to play against playoff-caliber opponents while still learning the position and receiving far less support than those top quarterbacks. Since Sanders has been consistently let down by every facet of organizational support, the results shouldn't come as a surprise, and he shouldn't be held responsible. There is a significant difference between reactionary hot takes and well-informed criticism, which is why it is crucial that supporters of the game who actually watch it share their opinions instead of simply decrying Sanders. If casual fans look at box scores and notice 3 interceptions, they may think Sanders isn't good enough. Fans who actually watched every shot, however, realized that he was under constant attack throughout the afternoon, making plays with defenders right in front of him in an attempt to create something out of nothing because the personnel and game plan surrounding him were wholly insufficient. Only one of those 2 entirely different accounts accurately depicts what actually took place in Chicago.
The annoyance of people disparaging Sanders without cause highlights a larger problem in NFL fandom, where quarterbacks are unfairly held responsible for organizational shortcomings that are out of their control. Being the most noticeable player, the one who touches the ball on every play, and the position that receives credit for victories and blame for defeats under any circumstances, Sanders is a prime target. However, a fair assessment necessitates looking beyond the numbers and taking into account the performance context, protection, weapons, game plan, opponent quality, and all other elements that affect a quarterback's potential. For a Browns team that has wasted decades cycling through unsuccessful quarterbacks, focusing on finding pieces through the draft to build around Sanders is the only practical way to move forward. Never pass up the chance to offer sufficient support to someone you've finally identified as having genuine franchise potential. You continue to surround him with talented people. You spend valuable resources on receiving weapons and the offensive line. You take all necessary steps to increase his chances of success. The Browns should have plenty of draft capital to work with because they have been awful for so long. Whether they will make prudent use of those resources is the question. It's important to take into account the possibility that Stefanski's job may be in jeopardy if these shortcomings persist. Ownership must eventually consider whether this coaching staff can adequately develop Sanders and create game plans that give the Browns a realistic chance to contend. Poor offensive line play, insufficient weapons, dubious play calling, and a failure to adapt when things aren't working all point to more serious issues than bad luck or unfavorable events. If Stefanski is unable or unwilling to alter his strategy, perhaps it's time to find a coach who can make the most of the talent on this roster, if he keeps setting Sanders up for failure with poor game plans. After watching this game, what is your honest opinion? Do you believe that Kevin Stefanski's strategy undermined Shedeur Sanders, or was the Browns simply outclassed in terms of talent? Should the organization focus on building through the draft and exercise patience, or should they make changes to the coaching staff? To what extent does the infrastructure surrounding Sanders bear responsibility? If you watch the entire game instead of just the statistics, please share your actual thoughts in the comments. Press the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to be informed about all the most recent Shedeur Sanders news, Browns drama, and NFL events. To ensure you never miss an update, click the notification bell, and we'll discuss what must occur in order for the Browns to genuinely support their franchise quarterback going forward. I'll see you in the next one.